On the night of June 1st, 2009, a passenger aircraft was preparing for its journey at Rio de Janeiro airport in Brazil. It was Air France Flight 447, scheduled to fly from Rio de Janeiro to Paris, France. On board were 216 passengers and 12 crew members. No one knew that this journey would become one of the most tragic and mysterious aviation disasters in history. Air France Flight 447 was an Airbus A330, one of the most advanced and reliable passenger aircraft of its time. The aircraft was equipped with modern technology and multiple safety systems designed to protect passengers and help pilots during emergencies. Everyone on board believed they would reach Paris safely after a long overnight flight. At around 10:29 p.m., the aircraft took off from Rio de Janeiro and began its journey across the Atlantic Ocean. For the first few hours, everything appeared normal. The pilots guided the aircraft to its cruising altitude, passengers relaxed in their seats, and the flight continued smoothly. However, as the aircraft moved deeper over the Atlantic Ocean, it approached a region known for dangerous weather conditions. Large storm clouds had formed in the area, bringing strong winds, heavy turbulence, and lightning. This region, known as the Intertropical Convergence Zone, is one of the most challenging areas for aircraft to cross. The pilots carefully monitored the weather and tried to avoid the worst parts of the storm. But because it was nighttime, visibility was extremely limited. Outside the aircraft, there was only darkness and thick clouds, while thousands of feet below was the vast Atlantic Ocean. At around 2 a.m. on June 2nd, the aircraft was flying at an altitude of approximately 35,000 feet. Suddenly, a serious technical problem began. The aircraft's pitot tubes, which measure airspeed, started malfunctioning because ice had formed on them. These sensors provide important speed information to the aircraft's computers and pilots. When the pitot tubes stopped providing accurate data, the aircraft's automatic systems began to experience problems. Shortly afterward, the autopilot disconnected, leaving the pilots to manually control the aircraft. For the pilots inside the cockpit, this was an extremely difficult situation. It was dark outside, the aircraft was flying through a storm, and the information they were receiving about the aircraft's speed was unreliable. They had only seconds to understand what was happening and make the correct decisions. While trying to control the aircraft, the nose of the plane began to rise. The aircraft started losing speed and eventually entered a dangerous condition known as a stall. A stall occurs when the wings can no longer produce enough lift to keep the aircraft flying normally. The pilots continued their efforts to regain control. Warning alarms were sounding inside the cockpit, and the crew was trying to understand the aircraft's condition. But the situation was becoming worse with every passing second. The aircraft began falling rapidly toward the ocean. A flight that had started as a normal journey had turned into a desperate fight for survival. The passengers inside the cabin were likely unaware of how serious the situation had become. Within minutes, their peaceful journey had turned into one of the deadliest aviation accidents in modern history. After falling for approximately 3 minutes and 30 seconds, Air France Flight 447 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean at around 2:14 a.m. on June 2nd, 2009. All 228 people on board lost their lives. The news shocked the entire world. The biggest question was, how could such a modern aircraft suddenly disappear over the ocean? After the crash, international search teams began a massive operation to locate the aircraft wreckage and the flight recorders. But finding a plane lost in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean was an extremely difficult task. The investigators knew that the answer to the mystery was hidden somewhere deep beneath the ocean, inside the aircraft's black boxes. After the crash of Air France Flight 447, the biggest challenge for investigators was finding out what happened during the final moments of the flight. They knew that the only way to understand the tragedy was to recover the aircraft's black boxes. These flight recorders contained important information, including cockpit conversations and technical data from the aircraft. However, The search was extremely difficult because the aircraft had crashed in a very deep area of the Atlantic Ocean. The ocean floor was thousands of meters below the surface, and the search area was enormous. Rescue teams from several countries joined the operation and used advanced technology to locate the wreckage. A few days after the accident, some pieces of the aircraft and personal belongings of passengers were found floating on the ocean surface. This confirmed that the aircraft had crashed into the sea. But the most important evidence, the black boxes, were still missing. The search continued for months. Special ships, underwater sonar equipment, and robotic submarines were used to explore the deep ocean. Investigators faced huge challenges because the aircraft was located in one of the most difficult places on Earth to search. Nearly 2 years after the accident, in 2011, investigators finally achieved a major breakthrough. The main wreckage of Air France Flight 447 was discovered deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Soon after, the flight recorders were also recovered. The discovery of the black boxes helped investigators understand the final moments of the flight. After analyzing the recordings and technical data, they began to understand how a modern aircraft could have crashed. The investigation revealed that the initial problem began when ice formed inside the pitot tubes, causing incorrect airspeed readings. Because the aircraft was receiving unreliable speed information, the autopilot system disconnected, and the pilots had to manually control the aircraft. The pilots were suddenly faced with a very difficult situation. It was nighttime, the aircraft was flying through a storm, and the instruments were providing confusing information. They had limited time to identify the problem and take the correct action. According to the investigation, the aircraft's nose began to rise, causing the aircraft to lose speed. Eventually, the aircraft entered a stall condition. At that moment, the wings were unable to generate enough lift, and the aircraft started falling rapidly. The pilots continued trying to recover the aircraft. They made several attempts to regain control, but the aircraft's condition had become extremely difficult to manage. One of the biggest problems was that they did not fully understand the aircraft's actual position and situation. The investigation showed that the accident was not caused by a single mistake. Instead, multiple factors combined to create a deadly situation. The technical failure of the speed sensors, severe weather conditions, the loss of automatic systems, and difficulties in recognizing the aircraft's condition all played important roles. After the accident, aviation authorities around the world introduced several improvements. Pilot training programs were updated to prepare crews for situations involving unreliable flight information and aircraft stalls. Airlines also improved safety procedures and aircraft systems. The tragedy of Air France Flight 447 became a major lesson for the aviation industry. It showed that even the most advanced technology cannot replace proper training, quick decision-making, and human understanding. The accident changed the way pilots are trained and how aircraft safety systems are designed. Many improvements made after this disaster helped make future flights safer. Air France Flight 447 was not just a plane crash. It was an event that changed aviation history and reminded the world about the importance of safety, preparation, and responsibility. The crash of Air France Flight 447 left a deep impact on people around the world. In this tragedy, 228 people lost their lives. They came from different countries, had different dreams, and were traveling for different reasons. Some were returning home, some were going on business trips, and some were beginning new journeys in their lives. But that night, all of their hopes ended over the vast waters of the Atlantic Ocean. After the accident, the families of the victims faced an extremely painful time. Many waited for answers and hoped for good news, but eventually they had to accept the heartbreaking reality that their loved ones would never return. The investigation into the crash continued for years. Investigators carefully examined every piece of evidence, including the aircraft wreckage, flight recorder data, and technical information. Their goal was not only to find out what caused the accident, but also to make sure that a similar tragedy would not happen again. The final investigation concluded that several factors contributed to the disaster. The first major problem was the failure of the aircraft's pitot tubes, which caused incorrect airspeed information. This led to the autopilot disconnecting and forced the pilots to manually control the aircraft in extremely difficult conditions. At that moment, the aircraft was flying through a storm at night. The pilots had limited visibility and confusing information from the instruments. Understanding the aircraft's actual condition became extremely challenging. The investigation also highlighted the importance of pilot training. Handling a high-altitude stall situation requires special knowledge and quick reactions. After this accident, airlines around the world improved pilot training programs to help crews deal with similar emergencies. Aircraft manufacturers and aviation authorities also made several improvements. The design and reliability of airspeed sensors were reviewed, and new procedures were introduced to help pilots respond better when automatic systems fail. The Air France Flight 447 disaster became one of the most important lessons in modern aviation history. Although the accident was a devastating loss, the lessons learned from it helped improve flight safety around the world. Today, Air France Flight 447 is remembered not only as a tragic accident, but also as an event that changed the aviation industry. It showed that advanced technology, while extremely useful, must always be supported by proper training, careful decisions, and human experience. The flight that began as a routine journey from Rio de Janeiro to Paris became a mystery that lasted for years. The search for answers brought together experts from different countries and led to major improvements in aviation safety. The 228 passengers and crew members who lost their lives are remembered as part of a tragedy that changed the future of air travel. Their story reminds us that behind every flight number are real people, families, dreams, and lives. Air France Flight 447 will always remain one of the most heartbreaking chapters in aviation history. The accident taught the world an important lesson. No matter how advanced technology becomes, safety depends on preparation, awareness, and the ability to make the right decisions in the most difficult moments.